Every year of every day, thousands of people fall victim to FWP,
I'm so cold.
Starving.
Nobody cares about me.
also known as first world problems.
I'm so cold. Somebody set the AC to 72. I need it at 73.
Starving. All he has leftovers.
Nobody cares about me. Nobody commented or liked my status.
I have too much chips for my dip. But if I open a new dip, I'll have too much dip for my chips.
Why does Apple keep making new iPhones? Now I have to get another one?
They've been through so much struggle,
The remote's over there. But I'm all the way over here.
so much hardship,
My iPhone 5 is too big for my skinny jeans.
so much attention. Show them how much we care about their FWPs.
I bought too many groceries. Now I'll have to make 2 trips.
With your help, we can put an end to FWPs and focus on the real problems, like starving children or homeless people. Because if you're complaining about something as silly as the iPhone 5, just wait till you see the iPhone 6.
Well, welcome to the continuation of our series called First World Problems. Many of you are familiar with the meme and know the amount of fun that we can have with it as we look at ourselves and all of these ridiculous FWPs. But we've been using it as a way to have a conversation about real biblical contentment, about what it means to live life focused and centered in such a way on God that we have real blessing, an experiential kind of contentment in our lives. When I was in school and in the graduate school, I loved buying books. I had to buy a lot of them, and of course, I always loved buying them. I didn't read them. I like buying them. I like how they look on the shelf. But I would always buy used books because I'm a cheapskate. And so when you buy used books, especially textbooks, or even if you get some of the old great religious classics, you will often find the best stuff in the margins. You will find all of the little handwritten notes. In fact, if you get the right textbook handed down generation after generation, you know all the key stuff that's going to even be on the tests. You know, people will highlight it. There'll be little comments, and there'll be notes, and there'll be little insights that maybe you wouldn't have had you simply been reading it. There's a lot of fantastic stuff that goes on in the margins. And it isn't, of course, just in books. Imagine for a moment you get a love letter, a long-lost art, by the way. But imagine you get a love letter. What do? You read every word backward and forward and multiple times, but are you content with just the ink on the page? Or do you want to read between the lines? Do you want to know the story that led to the letter? Do you want to know what story is happening after the letter? You will find all of that between the lines, in the empty space between the little daubs of ink. In life, this happens all the time. So you have a meeting, let's say you have a nice coffee meeting with an agenda, and you've got your few things that you've got to get through, but then you do. But in those moments of interaction and connection, suddenly the inspiration hits. And so what do? You start looking for a little bit of blank space. You grab the back of a napkin, and you start jotting and drawing and sketching, and suddenly something's being created, something that goes beyond those moments. See, there's a whole lot of magic that seems to take place in that white space. I think of the people who often will be faced with this terrible dilemma. And so now they go for a walk. And without even working on it, somehow this intractable enigma is resolved. It's solved. The idea simply comes in those moments of space. It's that empty space. It's the margins. And it's often where the creativity and the beauty show up. If you can imagine just for a moment our lives when they're compared to the world for all of history. We here are surrounded by an abundance that was once reserved for royalty. We have wealth and stuff and options that kings and queens would have enjoyed. And yet we live like emotional paupers. Isn't that a sad irony? We are strung out, and we are short-tempered, and we are whiners and complainers so often, but it's because we're weary and overloaded. It seems that we can't stop continuing this pursuit because we might miss out on something. We don't want to do that. And because we are so psychologically and emotionally and spiritually thin, it seems like every little FWP wears us down, bothers us, frustrates us. And many of them are actually killing us. We are a marginless people. We schedule ourselves so tightly that we simply cannot enjoy what we are doing at these moments. Psychology Today, they describe it as a malaise in which a person feels chronically short of time and so tends to perform every task faster and to get flustered when encountering any kind of delay. Does that sound at all familiar? It goes on, he tells us that if you want to add to that conundrum, our rapidly expanding technology, which is exponentially increasing, is supposed to improve our lives by making things easier and provide us much needed time to relax. Smartphones have blessed us with effortless ways to communicate instantly. Computers answer our questions in a split second and help us to keep up with the growing demands. But technology becomes part of the new problem we're feeling, not the solution. And the upshot is that in our uber-fast, uber-techno world, we are experiencing an epidemic. Do you ever notice that everything you own owns you just a little bit? It all needs a little bit of love, a little bit of attention, a little bit of care. Everything we own requires us to give it a little bit of something. Time, energy, money, thought, planning. So in a sense, it owns us. And so we can't rest because there's always something that needs attention. You never notice that we spend so much that we have nothing left to give? How can we be generous when there's nothing left at the end of the paycheck? We live so fast that we simply can't love. John Ortberg, he's quoting Meyer Friedman, and they're talking about a hurry sickness. He says, above all, it is a continuous struggle and unremitting attempt to accomplish or achieve more and more things or participate in more and more events in less and less time. We've got to be able to create the empty space in our lives. We've got to be able to create margin because it's only in the margin that we're going to be able to pursue God and love people. And that, to pursue God and love people, will be the secret to the blessed life, the life of contentment that we've been exploring. So if you would open up in a Bible to Psalm 84. We're going to be looking at it for 2 weeks, and that will be the end of First World Problems. The next 2 weeks, we're going to wrap up our series, and we're going to be spending both of them looking at Psalm 84. It'll be helpful for you. There are Bibles scattered throughout the room. We're going to be in that psalm for the remainder here of our time, so it would be helpful if you want to follow along and get the most out of it. Right out of the gate here, we see that our heart's deepest longings will only be satisfied in God's presence. Look at what he says in verse 1. How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty. My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may have her young. A place near your altar, Lord Almighty, my King and my God. Blessed are those who dwell in your house. They are ever praising you. When the psalmist here is talking about the dwelling place in verse 1, how lovely is your dwelling place, he's referring most directly to the temple. In ancient Israel, the temple was where God's presence most poignantly was experienced. That's where he dwelled, you could say. But even the Israelites knew that that was kind of an accommodation for God. He accommodated himself to us to have a sacred location, because they even knew that you couldn't contain God in such a finite way. Even when King Solomon was building the temple in 2 Chronicles, he said, the temple I'm going to build will be great, because our God is greater than all the other gods. But who is able to build a temple for him, since the heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain him? Who then am I to build a temple for him, except as a place to burn sacrifices before him? So what is it he's talking about now? How does the dwelling place translate? Well, for us, it's still the presence of God. It's just not a destination as much as it is an experience. You can now experience the presence of God. Even Jesus hinted at this when he said that you're not going to worship in a place, you're going to worship him in spirit and in truth, because now there you can experience the presence of God where you're at, wherever you are at, whenever you so desire it. You can dwell in his dwelling place. You can dwell in the presence of God. So it isn't merely a destination, it's now an experience of his presence. And apparently the sparrows, if you look at verse 3, have found their home there. Sparrows, if you see in verse 3, and the swallows, they make their nests. They somehow get the privilege of living in the presence of God all the time. Without much effort or work or thought, they, as simple creatures, get to always be in God's presence. So you can imagine how this would be. This guy is longing to get into the inner sanctum, which is reserved, the Holy of Holies, the holy places of the temple are reserved for only a few people, and only one in the deepest recesses of it, and only one time a year, and all of these limitations on the temple, except for the birds. They fly in, they can make their nest anywhere they want, they can find a home there, and they can dwell in God's presence all the time. They can even go up to the altar itself. You would never have approached the altar in that day. And yet the birds, they just flit about, carefree. They have some sort of privileged status. In fact, it's this privilege. You got anybody fan of Hicks, the Hicks Nursery over there on Jericho? I love Hicks. It's great. I get no product placement fees for this comment, but I think Hicks is amazing. It's a great place to go, especially in the dead of winter. It's like a little tropical oasis. They have these massive greenhouses, and they got all plants all over the place. You just need a little extra oxygen in the winter. Just go there and hang out. And guess what's there? Birds. In the middle of winter, when everything else is dead quiet, there's little birds chirping around, living a carefree life. You know, imagine if I went there camping, set up my gear in the middle of Hicks. Big old market, just bust out my gear, trying to grill up a little food or something like that. Be like, you're out of here. I'm like, yeah, but look, the birds get to live here. It's kind of like what the psalmist is saying. He's like, now the birds get this privileged status. How is this possible? And it's hard not to miss the contrast, because look at verse 2. The birds get it. They get to be near the altar, near this place of security, dwelling in God's presence, living this fulfilled life, this life of contentment. But he yearns. He says in verse 2, my soul yearns, it even faints. He's on his last legs for the courts of my Lord. My heart, my flesh cry out. This is a whole person experience. He's got this deep inner ache for God. And this contrast between him and the sparrow, I just find fascinating. The bird gets all the access. The man doesn't. And I feel like there's something going on here. Like when Jesus was talking about birds, he was talking about how he was doing his ministry in Luke 9. He said, the foxes have dens and the birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Here's the privileged status of birds again. And I think this isn't talking merely about his itinerant preaching ministry. He references himself as the Son of Man. It's his favorite term, especially when he's describing himself as the representative of humanity. He is our perfect representative. He's the second Adam. The first Adam blew it. Jesus is the second Adam. He perfectly represents us. And the second Adam has no place to lay his head. It's almost as if he's echoing this psalm. Like the birds who get a nest before God, like the bird in the temple in our psalm. But man cannot. Humanity has a yearning, a longing. They don't have that same privilege of experience because something inside us is propelling us toward discontentment. But I think the key to understanding this is that we are missing why that exists. See, we've been told many a time, many scholars love to point it out, that humanity has a hole, a God-shaped hole in their hearts, in their souls. And we have all of these yearnings, and we think the longings are bad, but they're not. They're good. You ignore that yearning at your own peril. We are, this Son of Man, we are restless in this day. We don't have a place to put our head because it's this restlessness of humanity that will drive you to dwell in God's presence. And it's the only thing that will satisfy you. There must be this longing. And if you ignore this longing, or if you try to medicate this longing away, or if you try to take those desires and fill them on cheap imitations and substitutes, you will miss the benefit of the longing. You'll be satisfying it on all the wrong things. We've got to let these longings drive us to God. And it's then, and only with the use of space, with the use of margin, both psychologically, emotionally, even time margin. All of those things will be essential if you're going to dwell in God's presence and satisfy those longings. John Ortberg, he was talking to a spiritual mentor of his, and he was trying to find out how it is that he could continue to grow spiritually. John Ortberg is an amazingly deep and spiritual man, but he's found a guy that's going to help him journey further. And this was their conversation. He asked him, what did I need to do to be spiritually healthy? And his mentor, after a long pause, said, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life, he said at last. Another long pause. Okay, I've written that one down, I told him a little impatiently. That's a good one. Now what else is there? I had so many things to do, so I was anxious to cram as many units of spiritual wisdom into the least amount of time possible. Another long pause. There is nothing else, he said. Ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your lives. You want the best wisdom of the spiritual giants of our day? That's what it is. You want to grow with God, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your lives. And yet most of us, what we do is we meander around in this life rather than journey toward God, rather than pilgrimage toward God. Look at verse 5. He says, blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. They go from strength to strength till each appears before God in Zion. You get that idea? The hearts are set on pilgrimage. See, the journey is good. Any journey toward the dwelling place of God is good. I think for a lot of us, we have missed out on this great opportunity. Some of you will remember the movie WALL-E. Remember that movie with the cute little robot and the big space? If you haven't seen it, you got to find a kid who wants to see it, because it's a little weird for you to watch animated movies on your own, but you can always do it if you find a kid. So, find a kid, watch it, get a niece, nephew or something. It's a great a satire on our culture today. And in it, I'm going to, spoiler alert, there's this great big spaceship, and they're far from Earth. They've neglected and abandoned her. And the captain is now coming to an awakening, a realization that they're not doing anything anymore. They're just floating in space uselessly when they ought to have been doing something else. And here's what he says.
I can't just sit here and do nothing. That's all I've ever done. That's all anyone in this blasted ship has ever done. Nothing.
On the Axiom, you will survive.
I don't want to survive. I want to live.
Must follow like.
The way that John Ortberg says this is that for many of us, the great danger is not that we will renounce our faith. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of it. We will skim our lives instead of actually living them. Is that what you want? You want to go through your life and at the end say, I survived? You want to listen to the robotic voice that says, but you'll survive? Or do you want to live? Do you want to know what it means to be in this journey now? Do you want to make a pilgrimage toward God? So many of us have neglected this journey toward God. We have decided that we will not go on pilgrimage, that we will simply meander around, distracted by this lackluster, mediocre kinds of distractions of this life and this world, and that we neglect our journey toward the one for whom our hearts yearn. This pilgrimage, the psalmist tells us, will bring refreshment to parched lives. Notice he says there, the valley of Baca. The valley of Baca in verse 6. They passed through the valley of Baca. So on this pilgrimage toward God's dwelling place, the Israelites would go through these very dry and arid places. called the Valley of Baca, which can be, the scholars tell us, was the Valley of Tears. It's a valley of weeping. It's a hard, hard place. It's a place of suffering. And in that place of suffering, some amazing and beautiful things can happen. In those desolate places, you can find hope. In those places marked by death, you can find life. That's a story woven throughout the Bible, the bringing of life from death. There was a guy, a 34-year-old Brighton Dama Zant from Zimbabwe. He died. All of his friends and the family, they were gathered up at his funeral. And they were mourning the loss of this guy. And all of a sudden, people start screaming. There's shrieks and terror and yelling and running because he starts moving. The guy starts moving. He opens up his eyes. He sits up. He tells everyone he feels better now. They were about to bury the guy. He was actually still alive. Now, once they got over their unbelievable fear and terror, I bet they were pretty unbelievably happy. Can you imagine what it would be like to get life from death? To get life from death. And that's what he's telling us happens to those who are on a pilgrimage toward God in the Valley of Baca. You know, this pilgrimage, there is joy in the suffering. Sorrow and grief will be used by God to draw us along, to move us along in our journey toward God. One scholar, he says that this transformation of the Valley of Baca, you see when he's talking about it, that there's this pools that will develop. You know, he tells them that they'll pass through the Valley of Baca and they make it a place of springs, which is sort of interesting because it's the weeping that seems to fill in the valley with springs. In this valley of weeping, they're tears themselves. And this one scholar said that this turning of the Valley of Baca into an oasis with all of these springs and pools of water is the kind of a faith that dares to dig blessing out of hardship. Do you want to have the kind of faith that will dig blessings out of hardship? That isn't about surviving, but is about living in a new kind of way. I love it. I think that something else takes place in the Valley of Baca as well. You see, not only do you refresh yourself in that valley, does God refresh you even through your tears, but the autumn rains come. Now it's as if the whole valley is being restored. You see, God will pour out. Listen, people all around us are suffering. They're suffering in little ways and they're suffering in big ways. Everyone finds themselves at different points in life in their own valley of tears, in their own valley of weeping. I heard a story. You should Scopes it to see if it's actually true. I've been told it's true. I'm not really sure. Apparently there was an elderly woman. She had come out to her car from the grocery store, and she found 4 men sitting in her car, about ready to drive off. So she drops her groceries, she reaches into her purse, she pulls out a handgun. And she points it right at the driver, and she says she knows how to use it, she's not afraid to use it, and she starts screaming at them to get out of her car, which of course they do. They all open the doors and they just start running. They just start running down the street. They don't even look back. And so this woman, she's all shaken up, of course, as you would imagine, but she composes herself and she gets her groceries, she sticks them in the car, she's taking her shaky hand and putting it into the ignition, and it doesn't fit because it's not her car. Her car is like 5 down, and so she, of course, can't believe what she just did, and so she's like, oh my goodness. So she gets into her car and she drives over to the police station and she's trying to explain what happened, and the sergeant starts laughing. And he points to the other side of the precinct where there are these 4 very pale men trying to describe how they've been carjacked by a crazy old lady, and there's all sorts of suffering going on. I don't know to feel sorry for them or feel sorry for the poor lady and all the distress that she was through or whatever. I wish all of our suffering could be resolved so humorously. Right now, there are 47 million Americans who rely on SNAP. That's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. 47 million. That means that entire economies of some small towns, they run in cycles based on when the federal the aid checks come. The entire economies, they shut down in rhythms and they wake up again. 47 million. The suicide rate from the 90s to 2010 rose 31%. 31%. People have said it is actually better to not be here anymore. It was not 31%, it was a rise of 31%. Family problems, job loss, foreclosures, all at the top of the list as to why. We were handing out flyers yesterday in Freeport, and this was for the Convoy of Hope. It's a great event, Convoy of Hope. We're going to be doing it as a church. It's going to be awesome. Help in under-resourced areas. We're handing out flyers to let people know about it. And we went to a couple areas that were pretty tough. You know, we're going through, and we're trying to hand these things out, and we're leaving them, and I kept thinking to myself, I can't wait to get out of here. I can't wait to get out of here. This place smells, it's dirty. I just want to get out of here. So I did. After we finished handing out these flyers, I went and got in my car, and I drove 10 minutes back to my house, and I got out of there. How many thousands can't? How many thousands are stuck in a valley of weeping? On our pilgrimage toward God, we can take these sorrows, our sorrows, the sorrows of others, and we can transform this valley of weeping into an oasis filled with God's autumn rains. Alexander McLaren, he said that if we have in our hearts as our chief aim the desire to get closer to God, then our sorrows and our tears will become sources of refreshment and fertility. Ah, how different all our troubles, large and little, look when we take as our great aim in life what is God's great purpose in giving us life. It's through this, it's on this pilgrimage, through the valley of tears, that we can bring healing and hope to others. The blessing will come not only to us, but to those around those who are on a pilgrimage toward God. And it will only be margin that will allow us to journey toward God and to care for people along the way. There are times where we are so preoccupied with ourselves and our stuff that we have no time for our journey with God, no space, no opportunity to turn sorrow to joy. We can do no work in the valley because we simply have not allowed ourselves the resources to do it. Dads, you know what it's like at the end of a workday. You're often too tired to help around the house, to play with the kids, to help with homework, to mediate disputes. Why? You got nothing left to give. Give me a break. Give me some space. I've spent it all already. You come home after a long week. You've decided that you're going to veg out in front of the TV for a few hours because you're just worn out and you're too tired to make time for your friends or maybe the neighbor across the street that needs your help. You remember a coworker who just got some terrible news from the doctor, and your first thought isn't, oh, how can I help and encourage and support and pray with them? It's, how can I avoid getting entangled in one more thing? See, we have few resources left with which to help. Wives, why is it that you have nothing left to refresh your husbands in this parched world? I'm going to leave this in the realm of the vague metaphor because I don't think that talking about sex on a baby dedication Sunday would be appropriate. That was a joke because I just talked about it. Did you get it? By saying I wasn't. It's late. So maybe you've got instead some flaky family members who need a bit of cash. Or you've got some kids that you want to get involved in every possible opportunity. Is that what your kids need? More stuff to do? More opportunities? One more tutor to help them out? Is that really what they need? Or do they simply need your time, your love? Do they need other people to love? Maybe what they have is a longing. Maybe they find themselves in an emotional valley of Baca. And what they need most is the refreshment that you can bring to them. So we create margin. We have empty spaces in our lives. And it's in those spaces that we will love God and people and that we will find contentment. If for you, you have to figure out where first to go after margin. Maybe for you, it's relational margin. Maybe your dance card is so full that you have got absolutely nothing left. And if that's the case, then maybe you need to declutter your life. Maybe you need to declutter your mind, your home. Maybe you've got so many relationships with things, with hobbies, with stuff, that you've got nothing left to have relationships with people. Maybe instead for you it's financial margin. You know that without any financial margin, we will never be able to love people in action. We'll do it with words, but we're not going to be able to do it in very real and tangible ways. And yet, for most of us, not all of us, I understand that, but for most of us, we make a decision about the standard of living that we're going to have, that we consider essential. We decide to let our standard of living continue to the type of life we want to grow as income grows. They say that Charles Wesley, an old-time preacher, that, he used to make whatever the numbers were. He used to make 20 pounds, or used to make 25 pounds, and he lived on 20 and he gave 5 away. And then as his income increased, to 30 pounds, he lived on 20 pounds and he gave away 10 pounds. And then over the decades, eventually he was making 100 pounds and he was living on 20 pounds and giving away 80 pounds. See, we all make decisions about the kind of lifestyle that we consider essential for us, what we deserve even. And because of that, we have no resources left to be generous, to care, to give. We spoke about it last week. I don't want to rehash the whole thing, but if you are missing out on that blessing of giving to others, it's a shame. It's a real shame. Maybe for you, you've got a schedule that is booked so tight that you're hurrying through life completely unaware and often uncaring. I was doing some work over at Panera, studying at Panera one time this week, and I noticed there was an older woman trying to get into the restaurant. And you know how this goes, right? Everybody around her is kind of rushing past, and occasionally you'll find some good soul who will half hold the door nowadays because we got so much. We got to get to our coffee. And so we got to get in there, got to hurry up. And this lady, she was super sweet. You could tell that she was kind of making way for others to rush past her. And she was just kind of moseying, taking her time. And I noticed all of this. And I decided, I was kind of approaching the register with her at the same time. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do the right thing here. And so I walk up, and she walks up, and I say, go ahead, please. Go ahead, you go first. And she's like, oh, no. You can go. I'm like, oh, no, don't worry about it. Why don't you go? Now I'm already impatient. I'm like, listen, I said go. So could you please, I didn't say that, but I'm like, all right, could you, because this is now taking like twice as long as I should have taken. If you'd already gone, I would already, but I don't say any of this because I'm trying to do the right thing, right? And so, so she says she's not ready yet. She's like, oh, no. Please, you go first. I almost did it. I'm like, no, no, please, you go. And she's like, but I'm not in a hurry. And I thought, you know what? I'm not either. Please, go. What kind of a world are we living in where a wise elderly woman needs to be so aware of all of the people hustling and bustling and rushing about her that she knows she's in the way, where she has to step aside to let other people rush up to grab their coffee so they could rush out? See, we can't do this. We can't go through life booked so tight. Why do we do it? Are we scared that we're missing out on something? We're trying to earn someone's love or approval or trying to prove our worth? What's driving us to the madness? In a quote that perhaps all of us could benefit from memorizing, John Ortberg, he says, love and hurry are fundamentally incompatible. Love always takes time, and time is one thing hurried people don't have. Fundamentally incompatible. So do you have margin? Do you have the empty spaces where the magic can happen? Where creativity and inspiration and the hearing of God's still small voice can take place, because it's in those spaces, those white spaces, the blank spaces of life, where you will find God, and you'll have the resources available to love others in word and in deed. Would you pray with me? Lord, we're asking that you would make this more and more true of us each and every day. May we be so filled with your power and wisdom. May we be so drawn to your presence. May we know the right ways to go. May we be able to stand firm and make the hard decisions necessary so that we could love others with a reckless kind of abandon, so that we can learn to dwell in your presence and satisfy those deepest longings of our souls. We ask all of it in Christ's name. Amen.